Morning, everyone. My name is Mike Millian, President of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada, and we are your hosts for today's webinar. As you probably heard, we are recording this session. After the session is complete, you will receive a recorded copy of today's webinar, everybody who registered, as well as PDF copies of any PowerPoint presentations that you're going to see here today. I'll just go over a few ground rules before we get into the topic, so you understand how things work. We do have participants muted and with the ability to turn your cameras on, not enabled at this time. Any comments, questions that you have, you can put in the chat. Because we are a bit of a smaller group today, when the presentation is over, I will give attendees the ability to unmute themselves and turn your cameras on if you wish. And when we get to the Q&A period, you can either ask it in the chat or you can raise your hand, and then I will come to you and you can ask your question in person. Again, before we get to the topic, I want to thank our sponsors for today's webinar, which makes these monthly webinars that we host free for you to attend. Magnet Forensics is our sponsor for today's webinar, and we appreciate very much your sponsorship. Today is Human Trafficking Awareness Day in Canada, February 22nd, which made this the perfect topic to have for this presentation today. As you may or may not know, since Truckers Against Trafficking, which our first presenter is Heather Fry from Truckers Against Trafficking. They've been around in the US for quite some time. And they made their entry into Canada, and Heather can correct me on this when she comes on, but I believe it was 2016 or 2017. And the PMTC has been involved with Truckers Against Trafficking since they entered into the country. We think it's a great cause. Unfortunately, human trafficking is a much bigger issue than most people realize, and raising awareness is just something that we thought was a great cause to get in front of, so we can help combat this issue, and are glad of our partnership for Truckers Against Trafficking. And we will have a couple of our members on here today as well, who have initiated this training in their operations as well, because they feel it's a great cause. In fact, when Jim Demek comes on, Jim was the one who introduced this to the PMTC years ago at our board meeting, and our board members jumped on this right away. So we're going to get into the topic in a minute. Just before we get into the topic, I do want to play a message from our sponsor. It will get cut off partway through. The message is about 3 minutes long. We're going to play about 1:20 of the video in interest of time. When the presentation is sent out to you with the recording, as well as the PDFs, we will also include a link to the sponsor video so you can see the rest of the sponsor video, should you be interested in Magnet Forensics company and what they do. So I'm going to mute myself and turn my video off, play this sponsor video for you, and I'll be back in just a couple of minutes.
The world is changing at a rapid pace, and so is the nature of crime. While we enjoy the benefits of a digital society, cybercrime is increasing at exponential rates. Corporate assets, reputations, and intellectual property are at risk because of cyber attacks that are increasing in frequency, sophistication, and economic impact. Law enforcement agencies are overwhelmed with the growth and complexity of digital evidence. At the same time, they're experiencing a shortage in skilled talent. This leaves vulnerable populations at risk. These are real and ever-growing problems in need of modern solutions.
At Magnet Forensics, we're reimagining digital investigations. We provide private and public sector organizations with innovative tools to investigate cyber attacks and digital crimes.
Today, over 4,000 organizations in over 90 countries use Magnet solutions to investigate crimes like terrorism, human trafficking, IP theft, and ransomware.
For over a decade, we have focused on innovation and R&D to help our customers make sense of critical digital evidence.
Using built-in investigative analytics, automation, artificial intelligence, and the cloud, our tools help investigators see the whole picture to find the truth.
We provide a comprehensive investigative starting point. We help uncover important connections. Our enterprise customers use our product to find evidence from a variety of sources and save time. Whether it's investigating employee misconduct, incident response, or an e-discovery investigation, we help them investigate.
Thanks again to Magnet Forensics for their sponsorship. And as you likely heard in the video, one of the things that their technology is used for is to help combat and help investigators catch people that are involved in human trafficking. So great sponsor to have for the topic that we're having here today, and glad that their product is able to help with that crime. Now I'm going to pass it on to our first presenter of the day. Our first presenter is Heather Fry, Director of Industry Training with Truckers Against Trafficking. As the Director of Industry Training for Truckers Against Trafficking, Heather helps lead the team advancing TAT's mission through its core program across multiple sectors of the transportation industry throughout North America. This includes working with organizations that operate over the road, locally, and in the home delivery space, as well as with organizations within the shipping and manufacturing industries. A graduate of the University of Tennessee with a Bachelor of Science degree in special education, Heather is a passionate fighter for marginalized populations. Prior to coming to TAT, she founded a nonprofit that provided wraparound care for foster and adoptive families. And when TAT came to Canada, one of the first people I met was Heather. So our relationship was back quite a few years. So with that, Heather, I'm going to stop my screen share, and I'm going to pass the controls over to you.
Great, thank you. Let me get my screen up and running.
Just hang here for a sec, make sure we get it going.
Okay, am I good?
Perfect. See the full slide and you're good to go. So I'm going to go sit in the background and watch this with the rest of you. See that in a bit.
Great. Thanks again, Mike. Again, my name is Heather Fry, and I am the Director of Industry Training with Truckers Against Trafficking, or TAT, as we call it. And as Mike said, today is National Human Trafficking Awareness Day in Canada. And so this is just a great time to deliver this message about human trafficking, to build some awareness around the topic and what a horrific crime it is. And while it may be difficult to hear the realities of this horrific crime, I will also be offering you some hope today, hope that you have the power to help. So today I'll be giving you a brief overview of human trafficking and how this crime intersects with the trucking industry. And then we'll be looking at some best practices from PMTC members that will show you how you also can combat this crime. So what do you think of when someone mentions human trafficking? Perhaps it's Hollywood's version with an action-packed story, which is a little bit more myth than reality. The reality of human trafficking looks a little bit more like these following scenarios. A child being sold for sex by her own parents to get drug money. Immigrant workers being tricked into a situation where they're forced to work long, hard hours for little to no pay. The single mom who is repeatedly beaten by somebody who she thought was her boyfriend and forced into sex acts or risk another beating. Or the runaway teen fleeing her abusive family into a group of new quote unquote friends who give her food and shelter, acceptance and love, only to add strings that requires monetary repayment through a business model that profits someone else and only leaves her indebted. And she feels that this situation is better than the one that she came from. So the Canadian Criminal Code for human trafficking is quite lengthy, as you can see on this slide. So for our purposes, we'll use a general definition of trafficking. It's the exploitation of human beings for the purposes of either commercial sex or forced labor. So when I say commercial sex, this would be things like prostitution, stripping, pornography, brothels, and most typically pimps. And with forced labor, this would bring to mind sweatshops, agricultural fields, workers not being paid for their labor or being held against their will and forced to work long, hard hours. And all of this is being driven by a third party, a trafficker or a pimp who is a victimizer, a person who is in control and is making a profit off of someone else. Victims often find themselves in situations they literally cannot get themselves out of. They are often beaten, raped, tortured on a daily basis so that their trafficker can earn money. And it's happening in our communities, and it is indeed modern day slavery. And oftentimes when I talk about human trafficking, others will shift the conversation to what is actually the crime of human smuggling. And these terms are often incorrectly used interchangeably, which can cause some confusion because they are two very distinct crimes. Smuggling is a crime against a country's immigration law. It happens when someone illegally transports another person into a country that they don't have permission to be in. And this crime always involves movement from one location to another, and it usually is for a large fee. Human trafficking, on the other hand, is a crime against a human being that does not require movement. For example, someone can be trafficked in their own home by their own parents. To provide a better understanding of this crime, I want to look at three truths today. The first of which is that slavery still exists. While it's now illegal to own another human being, the realities of this crime show human traffickers continue to enslave, torture, and profit off of their victims. Globally, there are over 50 million victims of human trafficking who generate over $150 billion in profits for their traffickers each year. The Human Trafficking Hotline reports that trafficking is happening throughout Canada in all provinces and territories. And although Indigenous women only make up 4% of the country's female population, they make up 50% of trafficked women. And just to bring this crime home, just the reality of it, to make it a little bit more real for you, victims may be forced to have sex up to 20 times a day. That is, they're being raped up to 20 times a day. And just because money is exchanging hands does not at all mean that the act is consensual. And some of you may know someone who has been sexually assaulted, and you know just how one incident can turn a person's life upside down. Imagine that kind of violence happening to you over and over and over, day in and day out. And this is the reality for victims of sex trafficking. Statistics Canada reported that in 2022, 91% of victims were trafficked by someone they knew, and 34% of those were trafficked by an intimate partner. With modern day slavery, traffickers use some common tactics: force, fraud, and coercion, that keep their victims compliant and even seeming like they are active participants in their own exploitation. Force is, of course, anything that you can think of, from one-off beatings to continuous brutal assaults. Victims are raped, gang raped, forced into drug addiction, mutilated, tortured, knifed, and shot. Some examples of fraud are any types of false promises, including false employment offers, perhaps promising a fantastic job in an exciting city, maybe as a model, for example, or even could be false expressions of romantic interest, which can look like promises of some version of love, acceptance, provision, or protection as the dangling carrot. By far the most commonly used tactic, either on its own or in conjunction with force and fraud, is coercion, which can include threats of physical harm and or shame and fear-inducing threats to their reputation. This would be things like, I'll kill you if you don't comply, or if you ever want to see your kid again, you'll do what I tell you to do, or just do this one more time and I won't share that video of us having sex with your high school. So we aren't talking about people who are being shackled and chained in a basement. The chains of force, fraud, and coercion are invisible and very powerful. Now, as traffickers prey upon vulnerabilities, they frequently target children using their hopes and dreams, their immaturities, fears, and even their disappointments as weapons to exploit their bodies for profit. And while anyone could be susceptible to the manipulations that traffickers use, undocumented persons, children and young adults who have or are in foster care, the homeless, runaways, LGBTQ individuals, and people who come from abusive homes are particularly at risk. And these vulnerabilities are exacerbated by poverty, racial discrimination, migration status, and fear of law enforcement. There are some preconceived ideas that of what a pimp or a trafficker looks like or where they come from. And the reality is that traffickers can be anyone. And here are some pictures of a few. We don't have time to dive into each one of them, but shown here is a Sunday school teacher whose wife was the pastor, an RCMP officer, and an international fashion executive. So traffickers are all genders, all races, all ages, all professions, and they quite literally can be anyone. Victims are initially exploited by the trafficker, but there is a second group who also exploits them, the buyers of commercial sex. The reality is, if there were no buyers, there would be no victims, and we simply cannot address the issue of human trafficking without addressing this issue of demand for commercial sex. And this would include stripping, pornography, as well as street or residential-based commercial sex. And the final truth today, most people want to believe that human trafficking is only happening in faraway third world countries, but the statistics show us that this simply is not true. As I said earlier, this crime is happening in all provinces and all territories. It's everywhere, from lower socioeconomic urban neighborhoods to rural areas to upper class gated communities in the suburbs and everywhere in between. It took me about 1 minute to Google these headlines from all over the country. So when TAT looked at this problem, we asked ourselves what group of people, if educated, could really make a difference? Who is positioned to see trafficking in action? And the answer was truck drivers. They are the eyes and ears of our nation's roadways, and they see things that other people don't see. They are trained to be vigilant, and they may actually intersect with trafficking victims at places that they normally go, like truck stops, rest areas, hotels and motels, city streets, places of business, and even inside of homes. If all professional drivers were equipped with the tools to recognize and report trafficking, imagine the number of victims who could be recovered and the number of pimps arrested. So we started TAT in 2009 to educate, equip, empower, and mobilize members of the trucking, bus, and energy industries to combat human trafficking through their everyday jobs. Our main goal is to saturate the trucking and related industries with our free training materials. And as you can see, we have a number of free training resources, including documentary style training videos for different industry audiences. And these include over-the-road drivers, local drivers, and rideshare, as well as mover and in-home delivery. Now, the cornerstone of our training is the 26-minute long over-the-road video that we couple with our wallet card, allowing individuals to have red flag indicators and instructions for reporting a crime right at their fingertips at all times. Today, I also want to highlight the fact that we now have added a video for movers and in-home delivery drivers, as well as local drivers. Both of which offer a different perspective of what red flags might look like in the context of driving regionally, locally, and within the community. So today I'd like to show you the training trailer for our local driver video.
One of my hardest moments was this time where my trafficker picked me up and another girl, and she looked high, and we weren't allowed to do drugs. He turned and looked at her, realized she was high, pulled the car over, told her to get out. He took her behind a building, and then he came back to the car without her. So I don't know what happened to her, but I never saw her again.
Human trafficking is a $150 billion a year industry. There are 40 million people enslaved in the world today. Human trafficking can and does happen anywhere.
And these victims find themselves in situations they literally cannot get out of.
People are oblivious to anything else happening other than their own world. I was there, and I saw that you didn't see me.
This is happening in our neighborhoods, in residential homes and apartment buildings, but it's also happening in commercial areas, in your local communities, in your local businesses.
Local drivers are very important against human trafficking because they're out there on the road. They are able to see things that law enforcement can't necessarily see. They're at these houses, they're at these different locations. They see these different signs, different telltale signs, and they report back to law enforcement what they see. So they play a crucial role in the fight against human trafficking.
Join our mobile army. Be those eyes and ears. Law enforcement cannot be everywhere at once. It is imperative that we, the general public, that we become activated, that we are looking, that we care enough to get involved and make a call that could help end the nightmare for a victim of human trafficking.
I also want to highlight our newly updated smartphone app that is available for iOS and Android, which allows folks to customize the user experience to the industry that they're in, including an option for the general public. And similar to the wallet card, the app has red flag indicators and instructions on how to report a tip. It also has geolocation functionality that allows you to make a call from within the app to the appropriate hotline number, depending on your location. And the exciting thing is that TAT's program is working. To date, we have trained over 1.7 million individuals on how to spot signs of human trafficking and how to report it. And all the training we provide leads to real life success stories. This is Joe Aguayo, who drives for Winco Foods. In September of 2022, Joe was driving down a remote stretch of road and passed a woman who had nothing on but a beach towel and looked a little out of sorts. Because there was no cell phone service in the area, and because Winco had a strict policy prohibiting unapproved riders in the truck, he passed her by and drove to the nearest police call box. He described the woman and her location and continued on his way, trusting that law enforcement would take care of the situation and confident that he had done all that he could do in the moment. So fast forward to a few months later, Joe was driving that same stretch of road when he had a weather-related accident, and a trooper came out to assist him. He inquired about the woman and the report that he had made, and this trooper just happened to be the one who had helped that woman. And the trooper relayed that the woman was a 27-year-old victim of human trafficking and was exhibiting behavior of having been drugged. She was in very rough shape and spent several days in the hospital. And he said that Joe had likely saved her life due to the severity of her condition. The trooper also said that this stretch of road had become a dumping area for Indigenous women in particular, more than likely because of how desolate it was. And criminals believed that it may be a place where people would be reluctant to stop. Many would have driven by not wanting to get involved or looked at her as a potential problem. But because Winco Foods had trained their drivers using TAT materials, Joe had a perspective of that woman being a human being in need of some help. TAT's ask is simple. If you see something, pick up the phone and make a call. Joe made a phone call that resulted in a victim's recovery, potentially saving her life and affording her the gift of being released from the hospital and given a caseworker to support her in the aftermath of her trafficking. Truck drivers alone have made thousands of calls to national hotlines, helping identify hundreds of victims. And we know that in a 5-year span, 41% of cases that truckers reported involve victims that were minors. So while it's clear that our program is working, it's also clear that there is a great need for the word to continue to spread so that more members of the industry can be trained. PMTC has been a great partner and supporter since we met, and Mike, it's 2019. We met in late 2019 when TAT initiated its expansion into Canada. Through Mike's leadership, the organization has hosted us several times, given us visibility at the annual conference, sat on advisory councils, and supported TAT's work financially. And we're also up on their website. This generosity has given us the opportunity to connect with its membership and build partnerships that expand our reach. And we always say that we're building up a mobile army out on the roads to assist law enforcement in recognizing and reporting possible trafficking cases. And the fact is, there are more truck drivers than there are law enforcement officers. So you can make a difference and are a huge asset in disrupting this crime. In terms of PMTC membership involvement over the course of the last 4+ years, about 20% of the companies represented have engaged in some form or fashion with TAT, many of which are still involved. And for that, we're so thankful. And to highlight some best practices, here are the ways that PMTC's companies have engaged over the years. They have provided speaking platforms for TAT to get our message out through virtual and in-person events. They have encouraged or mandated TAT training at onboarding or within their organization. They have become distribution points for our printed materials. They've influenced their carrier networks to engage with TAT and made introductions to other stakeholders. They have adopted anti-trafficking in persons policies into their corporate manuals. They've donated halls for our Freedom Drivers Project, which is a mobile exhibit. They've incorporated TAT training into their learning management systems, and they have donated corporate funds. A lot of great stuff has been done through this group. So we've talked about numerous ways that PMTC members have engaged. And here's a short list of initial engagement ideas. First and foremost, make TAT training a priority within your organization and incorporate TAT as a part of the safety culture. Secondly, understand and talk about the fact that if there were no buyer, there would be no victim. And think about adding a anti-trafficking in persons policy into your HR manual. Thirdly, talk with us about ways that your organization can support this life-saving work. And we have ways for non-asset-based companies to engage as well. And fourth, spread the word. Share this information with others in your sphere of influence and make introductions to TAT. And along the same lines, we always encourage people to take this message home to your dinner tables and share age-appropriate information with the children in your lives. They need to hear the reality of human trafficking and what a pimp could look like from somebody who they trust. And we have a number of excellent resources to assist in conversations like these on our website. It's only through our amazing partners and sponsors that we're able to build up this mobile army fighting human trafficking alongside us. For example, UPS, a driving force sponsor, and Bridgestone and Berger North Foundation are North Star sponsors, and many others who train their employees, spread the word, make introductions, and give corporate funds, as well as individuals who support TAT's work through their own financial giving. Human trafficking is one of life's greatest human rights violations. While the majority of people desire to make an impact with their lives, to go beyond the bare minimum and ensure that their careers affect lasting change for the good, not everyone is in a position to make that desire a reality, but you are. TAT's model is working. The trucking industry is rallying behind this movement, and each one of you is a critical player in ensuring that more lives will be saved. Thank you for your time today, and I will pass it back to Mike.
Thanks, Heather. And we'll see you again in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A period at the end of today's presentation. So thanks for that. And next, we're going to listen to Jim Demek, Lindy Canada, Inc. Jim is the Director of Distribution for Lindy Canada. He has been with Praxair for over 25 years as of January of this year. The majority of those years have been spent in supply chain, logistics, and transportation. Jim started his career as a logistics planner, and highlights of his career include developing integrated transportation solutions for oil and gas portfolio in the mid-2000s, developed and rollout of customized North American logistics systems in 2014. Jim rolled out the Truckers Against Trafficking program for Praxair drivers in 2017. Before this even came into Canada, so Jim and Praxair really were pioneers in this. And Jim put in here, he's the past chairman of the PMTC, and he calls himself the COVID chairman because he had one in-person meeting during his 2 years as our chair. Jim's a father of an 8-year-old, which takes up the majority of his time. He likes watching his son's soccer games. If he has free time, he enjoys barbecuing, fishing, and he has in here, sadly, watching the Buffalo Bills. I'm a New York Giants and Maple Leaf fan, so I understand pain. With that, Jim, I'm going to pass it over to you and let you share the screen, and I'll go into the background. I'll just wait here till you get your screen share up.
Yep.
Hey, perfect. You're good to go.
I'm good to go. Just a second here, just doing one thing. Okay, thank you, Mike, and thank you, Heather. I have to admit, it's always difficult following up your presentation, as the message is abundantly clear. Human sex trafficking is a horrible crime, and unfortunately, it is happening in all of our backyards. As Heather articulated, The good news is that we can make a difference. As Mike mentioned, Lindy and myself, or Lindy Canada, formerly Praxair Canada, and myself were exposed to TAT back in 2017 from one of my counterparts in the US side of the business. At that time, he indicated that he was laying out a plan to train 400 plus drivers on TAT. My interest was piqued just because of how passionate he spoke about the cause. He asked me to take the 20 plus minutes to watch the TAT training video. And needless to say, the video was very powerful and highlighted the horrible acts that was happening every day and quite frequently at the places that our drivers are at every day, and in some cases, multiple times during their shift. It was at that point that I knew I had to take real steps to introduce TAT to our Lindy team. So with that, we began, I reached out and took some of the first steps that I believe I needed to take. As Mike mentioned, at that time, TAT had a small footprint in Canada. And I reached out to Laura Cyrus. And unlike most people that I just call out of the blue, she was genuinely excited to talk to me. And we started to discuss how we could roll out TAT to our Canadian fleet. At that time, and then like it was in the US, there wasn't a robust system of resources. There wasn't a dedicated hotline. TAT was still in its infancy in Canada. For example, unlike the US, a dedicated hotline for truckers against trafficking did not exist. Rather, if Canadian drivers called in tips, they would be calling into Crime Stoppers, which is a generic line for the public to call into suspicious activity, crimes, etc. We also identified some other gaps around training materials, and specifically the video, which is a key part of the training, which was only available in English. That would obviously present an issue to our Quebecois drivers whose first language is French. So we started managing around those tricky issues by getting translations, leveraging some of our relationships with training folks, and we were able to begin our plan to roll out TAT to our drivers. So with that, I started to discuss how we should roll this out with my team. And, you know, unlike any time we roll out new types of training, there is some, concerns raised about our resource or capacity issues. But similar to how my counterpart in the US asked me to, I asked them to look at the video, and at that point, the momentum grew very quickly. But at that time, we decided to take a little bit of a different approach to training. Rather than having our managers or trainers deliver the training, we asked our senior drivers to watch the video and ask if they would be comfortable delivering the training with our management. So beginning in September of 2017 till the end of 2017, in 21 different locations across Canada, we had a peer-led initiative to train drivers on TAT. From the get-go, we had a high level of engagement from our teams. The subject not only challenged our folks to see how they could make a difference, but as important, it asked them to start thinking about the places and activities that they had frequently visited and seen through a much different lens. The responses were emotional at times, and it became quite clear to them that the victims of these crimes could easily be their sons and daughters. In some cases, drivers openly admitted that they either ignored or did not really appreciate what was really happening in those hotels and truck stops they frequented. Unfortunately, based on stereotypes that have been ingrained in our industry, they would do nothing to prevent it. However, the training challenged them to think differently, and that they should, could, and had an obligation to prevent these activities from happening. As next steps, we all agreed that this would not just be a one-time initiative. We agreed that all new drivers to Lindy would take this training, and we would incorporate TAT into our new driver training program, and then also would be part of our refresher training program. Essentially, TAT would be part of our driver curriculum, no different than our product handling, offloading, or backing procedures. Which really leads to the last bullet on this slide, and it's important to address the business case for investing the time and money to train our drivers in TAT. Granted, this is a great cause, but there's a lot of good causes available to our organizations. However, as our world has become much more aware of the dangers of human trafficking, and it's easy for drivers to connect the dots on how they can make a difference, the TAT cause is a natural fit to our industry. More so, I think it's important to note that our folks like and want to work for organizations that genuinely take steps in bettering the communities they live in. TAT epitomizes that culture of difference making and is a cornerstone in fostering the type of culture that recruits and retains good employees. So as Mike mentioned, Heather mentioned, since then, Heather and TAT have made great strides in getting a bigger footprint in Canada. TAT has been working very diligently in developing resources and the key networks within the Canadian transportation industry. And despite the pandemic, TAT has made significant inroads with within Canada, developing relationships with many other fleets, provincial and federal law authorities. And in 2021, they helped found the Truckers Against Trafficking Committee, which I'm proud and honored to be a part of. The committee is made up of private and public entities which use their network to provide awareness, training, and action steps to help combat human trafficking. From a Lindy perspective, and finally with no pandemic restrictions in place, we're looking at refreshing our program, specifically around developing a company culture and acknowledge our employees' role in the fight against human trafficking. We want to recognize and provide the feedback that they can be difference makers. So this year, Canada is looking to up our game in the efforts against human trafficking, which also include adopting an anti-trafficking in-person policy, asking for quarterly feedback from our teams about the program and what they may have reported, inform employees of upcoming TAT events or coalition built and have them be a part of it, and then encourage our third-party carriers and where appropriate customers that specifically have ties in Indigenous communities. So, I just want to end off that either if you're new to TAT, have been an active member or a member, but for some reason haven't been able to commit the time to the program recently, I would suggest that you look at the opportunities and how your organization can actively make a difference in fighting this horrible crime that is unfortunately happening in our backyards. Because as I've said it before, and I will continue to say it again, with the access that our industry has to people, very good people, a network, and resources that are at our disposal, we have an obligation to be difference makers with TAT. So thank you for everybody's time today, and please don't hesitate to reach out to me either after the presentation or after today. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. And we'll see you again in a few minutes when we get to the Q&A period. So next, I'm going to bring Matt Richardson up. Matt is the Vice President at KRTS Transportation Specialist Incorporated and has been in the trucking industry since he was old enough to hold a scrub brush and help wash trucks. Proud holder of his AZ license, Matt is a graduate of the University of Guelph, where he played football for the Griffins and captained the team in his final 3 years. Along with his role at KRTS, Richardson is the past chairman of the Private Motor Truck Council of Canada's Young Leaders Group, as well as a current board member of the Maine PMTC Board of Directors and the Truck Training Schools Association of Ontario. Matt resides in Caledonia with his wife, Julie, and 2 young daughters, Tessa and Michaela. Unfortunately, he's a Boston Bruins and a Hamilton Tiger Cats fan, but I won't hold that against him. And Matt, I'll pass it over to you.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, good win for the Bruins last night, late against the Oilers. So thanks. I'd like to thank the PMTC for having me on today to discuss this very important topic and how KRTS is going about providing some education to our entry-level students. In my bio, Mike mentioned my girls, Tessa and Michaela. The first time I heard the message that TAT was providing, it hit home. But then as I had my girls and they age, they're 5 and 3 now. It hits home even more every time I hear it. And I think it was either Jim or Heather mentioned that this is taking place in communities near you. As some of you are aware, I live in Caledonia. It's a very small 4-stoplight community. But human trafficking is taking place even here. I'll read a headline of an article that was in 2022. You can Google it for the full details on the story, but the headline was 3 Caledonia men guilty of human trafficking after teen forced into the sex trade. It was an 18-year-old or a late teen that thought she was taking her first steps into a modeling career, but was instead forced into the sex trade. And if that's taking place in our 4-stoplight town, there's nowhere that it might not be taking place. How we got involved with TAT, KRTS belongs to a number of different industry associations. With that, we're always trying to bring value from those associations back to our organization. I want to say about 2018, we were introduced to TAT through the Truckload Carriers Association at an annual conference. That was our introduction, and since learning about TAT, we've seen the value and importance, and have grown our participation steadily. We're always looking for ways to arm our students with different tools and educational opportunities that are going to benefit them as they enter the industry and start their career as a driver. So we saw a huge value in arming our students with this information, not only for them, but also for the fact that they could bring more awareness to the industry as a whole. So our first step was to provide the education to our professional trainers. So they all went through the TAT program. Once that happened, we started delivering the materials to a small percentage of our AZ students, those students who were taking AZ programs that were above and beyond the MELT curriculum. In 2020, roughly that time, TAT started the Canadian Coalition, and our president and founder was asked to be part of that committee and participate with their ongoings. We continue to offer it to a smaller percentage of our students taking programs above and beyond MELT, but then in 2020, our lead instructor came to me with an idea of how things could be shifted around a bit, that we could include all of our students in the TAT training. Any entry-level student obtaining their AZ license. So in 2020, that's what we started to do, and now a few years after that, we've trained nearly 400 entry-level. We've had nearly 400 entry-level students successfully complete the TAT training, which we're very proud of. One of the things that I always look forward to reading is all of our students take a questionnaire at the end of their in-class period. One of the questions on that is, what was the most surprising thing you learned this week? And I'd just like to share with the group two quotes from that. The trafficking content was a huge eye-opener for me. I didn't understand the extent to which certain things were taking place. When I go for a job interview after I get my license, one of the questions I will ask any potential employers is, do you provide any information to your drivers on human trafficking and how they can keep an eye out for it while on the road and try to help combat it? One more I have here. The information on human trafficking was mind-blowing, really. The public needs to be educated more on this. I have had conversations with a number of friends since that day in class, and no one knows the extent to how close this is taking place and how close to home it is taking place. So, we value the information that we're able to provide to our students through TAT. And hopefully it just does a small part in educating more people, and getting the message out there that this can truly happen anywhere, and they can be the eyes while they're out there on the road during their career as a professional driver. I'll turn it back over to you, Mike, for any questions.
All right, thanks, Matt. Jim and Heather, if you want to come back on camera here as well. And we'll open it up for some questions. I did have one pop in the chat from Stephanie Caruth. I have gone through the TAT training back when I was working in a carrier environment, but now as an industry consultant, I am interested in hearing of additional ways I could be involved other than encouraging clients to get involved. Well, the best way probably, I guess, would be to get in touch with Heather. And Heather could probably help you out with that, Stephanie. So, Heather, anything to add other than having Stephanie get in touch with you?
Yeah, Stephanie, hi. I remember you from back in 2019, early 2020. So yeah, so for folks who aren't actually in a straight trucking company with assets, it sounds like you're in consulting now. Some questions I would ask you are, do you have a newsletter that goes out to potential clients or to your clients where, we could put an article in there? Social media campaign, putting our information on your website. We really look to consultants and insurance agencies and law firms, for example, to be conduits of spreading information and making introductions and getting the word out. So that's what I would first start with. And then I would just look at, and with all companies, we look at what is your point of intersection with commercial drivers, with the transportation industry. And we look for ways to build out a program that works for the structure of your company, your culture. We want it to be an easy lift. We want it to make sense. And so that's what we would do. We would engage in a conversation and see what works best.
Okay, perfect. If anybody else has a question, feel free to put your hand up. I have now gave you the ability to unmute yourself and turn your camera on. While we're waiting to see if anybody else has questions, I do have a few here myself. Jim, I'm going to start with you. Why did you at Lindy choose to go with peer-led training? And do you think it is necessary to do it this way for a successful rollout of the program?
Thanks, Mike. At the time when we, again, as I mentioned, working with Laura, talking to our folks, and where, as Heather just mentioned, kind of where our company culture was, we believed it was going to be more effective to come from our drivers working with management, realizing this is something a little bit different than us reviewing our backing procedure. And we really wanted to gain some momentum at the time by doing it that way because it was different. If I was to do it, if fast forward now, now almost 7 years, would we do it the same? I don't believe so. I think with the resources that are in place now with Truckers Against Trafficking in Canada, I think we probably would deliver it a little bit differently. I think if there's a time and a place for different programs and how you roll it out. And I think that's where, as a fleet, you need to ask yourself what you think is going to be more effective to get the message out. Because again, as I continue to say, I think once people become aware of what human trafficking really is, where it's happening, I think either peer-led or having your driver trainers do this, your managers, I think it's going to roll out effectively regardless.
Okay, thanks, Jim. Matt, so we know Ontario has announced that they are going to make trafficking awareness training mandatory as part of the entry-level training program in Ontario when they make their amendments coming up. So that's one province, but there's a lot of other jurisdictions in Canada too. Do you feel that the TAT content should be required under the mandatory entry-level training program?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think it's great that Ontario is going to make it mandatory, but I'm for sure a proponent for it going all the way across the country. To be able to, for a program that takes such little time to provide such important information to those drivers who are going to be running the highways and roads all over our country, all over the United States, for them to be armed with the information that could help them save a victim, I think is critical.
Yeah. And, you know, you touched on the end of yours, Matt. I used to be a long haul truck driver for a lot of people that don't know my background. And a lot of the stuff that I was seeing, sex trafficking happening all the time in front of me, I just didn't realize that's what it was back when I was young, right? I thought it was a person out on themselves, on their own, maybe hitting hard times, but willingly also getting into, you know, selling themselves. And now that I look back and know what I know now, can pretty much guarantee all of them were not doing it willingly. Right. And you know, now that I have a 20-year-old daughter at home and 2 other kids, it really makes you sit back and think about what you witnessed, and maybe you didn't think about it at the time. And when it could be your own kid involved in that, it kind of changes your perception for sure. So we'll take this last question that has come in from the audience. And this probably would be for you, Heather. Apologies for being green to this conversation. My question is, what are the fail safes that are put in place from predators learning from TAT how to adapt or change their technique skills? Or is that just an unfortunate ongoing issue of the nature of the beast to be ever evolving in their methods?
I think that's a great question. You know, I don't know that the methods change so much, but one thing, and this is a red flag to look for, traffickers will move their, and I say girls, of course, this isn't a problem specific to the female population. It does affect boys, but at a lower percentage. They will move their girls from place to place to place very quickly and frequently, so that number one, the victims don't know where they are, so they don't know how to get help. And so that they can't form any sort of bonds or relationships. So the way that affects us as the eyes and ears out on the road is that we have to be able to take a second look and make a phone call if we think we're seeing something right away. The phone call needs to be made immediately. And the reason is because if you wait and think about it and say, oh, I'm just not sure, they could be gone. The trafficker knows that they need to move quick. So what we always recommend is that a call be made immediately, even if you are not sure if what you're seeing is human trafficking. Call the authorities, say, I think that I'm seeing human trafficking, and let them do their job. Let them come out and look at the situation and see if something needs to be done. So make the call, even if you think that you are, you could be wrong. So it can be done anonymously. You know, the risk is very low to do something like that. So great question.
Perfect. Thanks, Heather. And yeah, the hotlines that are available are anonymous, correct? That's important for people to know.
Yes.
You don't have to give your name and info.
Correct.
So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. All right. So that brings us right up to the hour. So I want to thank everybody for attending today, to take time out of your schedule to learn and become more aware of the signs of human trafficking. I want to thank our sponsors, Magnet Forensics, for sponsoring this important topic. And I want to thank Matt, Jim, and Heather for taking time out of your day to speak about your experience and this topic with our members. The slideshow will be sent out as long as they're recording. Reach out to Heather or any one of us on this call. Heather's contact info will be in her slide. If you're not sure how to get in contact with Heather, all of you on here have the PMTC's contact info. Reach back to us and we can facilitate the connection between the people that you need to reach out to. So with that, I'm going to ask everybody, hope everybody has a great rest of your day, and we'll touch base again soon. Thank you. Take care.
Thank you all.